to From the Mind of Christine McConnell. We are here working on this old Victorian house, and I've decided to finally start creating my own wallpaper. I've been wanting to do this for a really long time, and this house is kind of the perfect canvas for that. I've been focusing on this front sitting room for the last 3 months. I just finished an episode on Patreon of creating wallpaper for the actual main part of the wall. And in this episode, I'm going to be tackling the border, or what's also called a frieze, that goes around the top. I got really lucky here as far as there were 2 kind of forgotten patterns that I discovered in this room, hidden under old paint and even some woodwork. So they were interesting patterns. I would love to kind of resurrect the spirit of them into this border. So with that said, let's begin. A few months back, I was working in this room and I felt like I noticed something right under the picture rail. And when I lifted off a section, I uncovered this probably about 1880s wallpaper. It was most likely originally the very top piece of a frieze. So I was able to chisel it off the wall very carefully, get it into the computer, and over a good amount of time, piece it back together until it was completely intact. When trying to research the origin of this paper, I stumbled upon Bo Sullivan of the company Bowling & Co. He works there with Gwen Jones, and they specialize in the history of various different papers, and so that was an incredible source of information. He also put me in touch with Wayne Mason of Mason & Wolf, which is a company that does reproduction Victorian wallpapers. Between the 3 of them, they completely filled me in on what Greek key is, helping me date this paper and giving me just basically a ton of incredible information. I'll leave the links to their websites below. Starting this part of the project, I knew I wanted to incorporate the pattern that I discovered there, but I didn't want it to have its original texture because what I'm doing is going to have its kind of its own sort of feel, and if I had just copied and pasted it into this, it wouldn't really have achieved that. So I hand drew out these pieces, and then I'm just going to get them into the computer and clean them up as much as possible. Once I had this piece cleaned up and smoothed out, I was able to import it into the actual document that I'm going to be building this sort of border or frieze in and start piecing it together. So the pattern that I'm looking at here is something called Greek key, or also known as Chinese fretwork. To me, it jumps out as looking like a symbol of something terrible, even though that's not what this is. So for that reason, I'm going to be adjusting the pattern a little bit just so it doesn't lock into that symbol. And that way, it's kind of reminiscent of how this originally looked without being, at all offensive. So let's talk about the theme for this particular paper. I'm a huge fan of Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I want to create something that has, some elements of that are kind of reminiscent of that story without being too on the nose. It's a little bit of an odd fit for this particular house, but I feel like I've got something in mind that will still be kind of Gothic and Victorian. So let's see if we can't create some pieces that look like they belong under the sea. Something I've noticed about this house is there are already a lot of sort of Greek influences all over the place. So I wanted to create something that was harmonious with that. So I'm taking direct inspiration from a late 18th century paper that has kind of a Greek theme to it. I wasn't absolutely certain about how I wanted the hair on this to look, so a great sort of trick I can show you is if you lay trace paper over it, you can sketch it out first beforehand. That way you can make sure you're going to like it before you potentially ruin your original illustration. I don't sketch human figures a lot, so I actually don't sketch a lot, period. So whenever I tackle something like this, it's always kind of intimidating, but I find that if I'm patient enough and willing to put in an obscene amount of time, I'm usually pretty happy with the result. One of the really exciting things that I uncovered in this room is this ancient stenciling that was done probably around 1900. And I can't save the paper, but I can save this pattern. So my plan is to scan this trace into the computer and then from there, draw out the pattern again, but give it kind of my own artistic flair. My favorite way to draw things out and paint anything is really physically with my hand. But if you have kind of interesting brushes, you can do really cool stuff in Photoshop. Now that I'm really happy with how this looks, I can start duplicating it. There are many things that make working, in the computer and not in the physical world a whole lot nicer. And one of those things is you rarely ever have to draw something twice. So if you draw it one time, you can just very quickly mirror it over onto the other side and it's going to match perfectly. With all of these pieces perfected, now I can start pulling them into my actual working document and placing them wherever I want them to go. Something else I absolutely love being able to do in the computer is once you've sketched something out and you scan it in, you can start making all of like the highlights and shadows really pop and give it really kind of a three-dimensional feel, which, obviously is achievable when you're physically drawing something out, but my gosh, is it a lot simpler when you're doing it in the computer. Oh, and something you might be wondering is why is the mermaid topless? And I have a reason for that. Initially, I drew a version that had sort of like sea life kind of covering her breasts, but once I started actually researching, illustrations and paintings of mermaids from the 19th century, they were all topless. And something changed because there must have been some sort of societal shift in modesty. But the way I grew up, every mermaid, obviously having clams or something. But I am trying to keep this as period kind of as I can. So that is why she looks like this. So I'm very, very happy with how this came out. I don't draw a lot, so every time that I do it, I find that I'm learning and practicing while I do it, especially faces. Those are super tricky for me for some reason. But now that I'm happy with it, let's start putting these pieces together and see what this is going to look like. The really great thing about a repeat on like a border is it's pretty simple. Anything that's coming off of your edge on one side just has to be coming in on the edge on the opposite side. And you really want to make sure it's matching up to the pixel. That way you get a completely seamless match when it starts repeating. Now I'm just going to test it out and see how it starts to look once it's done that repeat. Something I discovered after I had started this entire wallpaper project was I initially thought I would be able to just sketch everything out beforehand, scan it in, and then everything would just sort of magically harmoniously go together. And what I actually discovered to be true is As you're working on something, you realize, oh, this doesn't fit, or oh, I need something here. So every time that would happen, I would just go back to my sketch pad, mock something up, and get it back into the computer. I realized these swampy details make a big difference and really lend themselves well to the designs, so I had to keep going back to my paper and drawing up new ones. Something else really great I was able to do is go back into the room, and on the mantle there were these kind of etched in flourishes, and so I've just went in and photographed those, and now I can use them as a reference when I draw them up in Photoshop. Something I love about doing this so much is bringing elements that, are absolutely true to the house into this design. So when you're looking at this whole thing, it should be really cohesive with the room. To really make each additional piece blend in with this design, everything has a light source coming from the right and a shadow on the left, and that kind of marries things together really smoothly. So now I'm going to start aging this paper. One of the things that I've noticed with, a lot of Victorian restoration is you'll have like an old-fashioned paper printed, and it's obviously a brand new print, and you put it up in the house and everything else in the house is like 100 or more years old, and it can look really foreign. So I don't want that. I want to create something that the minute you put it up, it just looks like it's been there forever. So let's start applying this technique to create that effect. A few months back, several supporters on Patreon pointed out that I was doing everything with a mouse, and that's how I'd always done it. And they were like, you need to get this like Wacom Cintiq thing. So that's what I did. And oh my gosh, it has just made everything so much easier. So now I can actually just draw physically onto the computer. To add depth and kind of an atmosphere to this underwater scene, on the furthest back layer, I'm creating kind of a gradient, and I feel like it's adding a lot of dimension to this image. So now let's color match this border or frieze to the side wall that I created earlier. Before I make a huge change like this, I always save a duplicate copy because sometimes you go to sleep and you wake up and you're like, oh, I did the wrong thing. And you always want to have like a fallback to go back to in case catastrophe happens. Oh, something I didn't mention is once this and the sidewall comes back from the printers, if I'm super happy with it, I do plan on making both of these patterns available for purchase. Okay, I'm very, very happy with how this came out. I've been wanting to create my own wallpaper for a really long time, and I finally found a really great manufacturer just over in Pennsylvania, not far away. They do really beautiful, high quality looking prints. It's gonna be a few months before those get out here and I'm actually able to install it. So when I do that, I'm just like, there's so many things that I'm tackling in this room, and I'm gonna do a big public like reveal of what's going on in there. Wait till you see it. In the meantime, while we wait, if you would like to see all of the other projects that I've been tackling here in this house, follow the link below to Patreon. And, until then, take care of yourselves, and I will see you again very soon.